All right, we got UFC 302 this weekend, headlined by the lightweight championship bout between Islam Makhachev, the champ, Beeb's pupil, and Dustin the Diamond Poirier, essentially America's hero. And this is Poirier's third shot at a championship and quite possibly his last. But before we get into that main event, we're going to go through the entire card, start to finish, and give our thoughts on each matchup. First fight on the card, Andre Lima versus Mitch Raposo. This is a long time coming for Mitch Raposo, but he's got a tough test in front of him because Lima throws powerful non-telegraphed kicks and also looks for spinning pivot attacks as his opponent circles off the cage. And his pressure both on the feet standing with strikes as well as top heavy pressure on the ground were very, very obvious on his Contender Series fight, and he was showing glimpses of ability with the hands in his UFC debut before he got bit. And we haven't seen too much of Andre Lima, but for Mitch Raposo, we saw him on The Ultimate Fighter. We've seen him on the Contender Series. He had a really gritty, competitive scrap with Jake Hadley before getting caught in that submission. It was very back and forth up until that point. He's comfy with his hands, Mitch, and he's very tough and he's strong. I feel like this is going to be a much more competitive fight than others are making it out to be. I'm rooting for Mitch, but like I said, I think he's got a tough test in front of him. I think it favors Lima, especially if Lima's got some jiu-jitsu in his back pocket that he has yet to necessarily show. I think this is going to be a really good fight to open up the card. Next is Joselynne Edwards versus Ailin Perez. Perez is more aggressive and has fought through more adversity in the UFC and still came out on top as the winner. Joselynne Edwards has had a lot of questionable decisions go her way, fights that were way too close to call. And because of this, I'm going to favor Ailin Perez. Next, Mickey Gall versus Bassil Hafez. Hafez had the showing of a lifetime in a short notice debut against Jack Della Maddalena, who is now in the top 5. And it's been a while since we've seen Mickey Gall in the cage, to be specific, since he fought Mike Mallet back in, I think, 2022. And this could be a good thing, but it also could be a bad thing. There could be a lot of things that Gall has worked on in the time away, but the time away could also have been because of him dealing with other things in his life that kept him away from his training. It's a real gamble in that sense. Not to mention, I mean, I think a lot of questions about Bassil Hafez will be answered in this fight, considering just how quickly that matchup with JDM was thrown together on top of the fight that it wound up being. So I favor Hafez, considering he has slightly more momentum and more things to build off of than Gall. And I'm curious to see whether the time away favored Gall or was to his detriment. Either way, I favor Hafez. Next, we got Niko Price versus Alex Morono. Morono always puts on a stellar performance and a tough fight. He's got a very dependable style. Like, he is just so good at keeping the fight on his terms because of threats that he has. He has really good jiu-jitsu, very underrated jiu-jitsu. On the feet, he's pretty slick. He has those windmill-like overhand shots that he can catch people with. He's done it many a times in the past. And Niko Price, on the other hand, he's just a junkyard dog. He's that give one to take one type of fighter. And lately, at least in his last 2 fights, he's shown, at least in the Phil Rowe fight, he showed the ability to forge back and potentially seek out a finish. But that Robbie Lawler fight looked like it took away Price's ability to take a solid punch. And That being said, he took a good amount of time off after that Robbie Lawler loss, which could favor his chin. Nonetheless, Morono has stayed active, stayed busy, and stayed winning, and has looked good while doing it. So, with that being said, I'm going to favor Alex Morono probably by a decision. Next, we got Phil Rowe versus Jake Matthews. Matthews was competitive against Michael Morales, and Michael Morales is a very dangerous striker, and he's a big welterweight. I think that the length and reach of Rowe could present issues unless Rowe chooses to stand in the pocket with Jake Matthews, which is very possible because it's something we've seen Philip Rowe do in the past. I think this will be one of those fights that winds up being fight of the night or close to it, similar to Lima and Raposo. But I do see Philip Rowe getting it done, and it's probably going to be a decision. Next, Grant Dawson versus Joe Solecki. Solecki is coming off of that slam knockout to Drakkar Klose past December, and I don't see Grant Dawson necessarily taking advantage of that in any way, but I just think Dawson is more capable of mixing it up on his terms and capable of controlling the fight. There's a chance that if Grant Dawson does initiate the grappling and get Solecki down, that Solecki will try to play jiu-jitsu off his back again. And I'm curious to see how that plays out because I don't think Grant Dawson's going to be going for any slams. And we have seen that Joe Solecki has dangerous jiu-jitsu, but the question is, did he learn the lesson against Drakkar Klose, and is that a lesson that's going to kind of compel him to not use his jiu-jitsu, or are we going to see him more or less double down on it? Either way, I think Grant Dawson gets it done. I think he grinds out a decision, maybe gets a late finish. We've seen him do that in the past, so favoring Grant Dawson. Now we're on to the main card. Roman Kopylov versus Cesar Almeida. Almeida showed in his Contender Series fight, making the transition from kickboxing to MMA, that he has next-level composure and a well-rounded game, despite not starting out in MMA. I mean, he had a lot of control time and damaging strikes from the top in that Contender Series fight, and then beat a fellow Contender Series alum in Dylan Budka in the follow-up fight and got the finish. So he's shown that ability to go to deep waters and keep the fight on his terms and seek out a finish. Kopylov, on the other hand, he is very dangerous on the feet, but shown that if the fight begins to get mixed up between striking and grappling, the danger of his striking becomes slightly less and less, like we saw against Anthony Hernandez and like we saw, I believe, against Albert Duraev. If Cesar Almeida can control the pace of this fight and keep the striking exchanges on his terms while also mixing in the takedowns to wear Kopylov out, I could definitely see him getting a pretty efficient route to victory in that way. So I'm going to favor Cesar Almeida. Next, Randy Brown versus Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Both guys are coming off good performances. Randy Brown's TKO of Muslim Salikov was, go back and watch it. Sick knockout. And, I mean, the last guy that Randy Brown lost to was Jack Della Maddalena, currently in the top 5, calling out Shavkat Rakhmonov. Zaleski dos Santos, similar situation. Coming off a competitive fight with Renat Fakhretdinov. Hurt him late in the fight with body shots, despite looking to be almost out of there early in the fight. Wound up being a draw. And I feel like this is another fight that could be fight of the night because you've got Zaleski dos Santos, who shows otherworldly resolve against essentially a freaking Terminator. And got Brown, who is a very slick striker, and once he gets in his rhythm and gets an understanding of his distance compared to his opponents, very hard to stop. This is a toss-up matchup and another possible fight of the night or banger. But I'm going to have to favor Randy Brown. The only way that I see Zaleski dos Santos getting Randy Brown out of there is if he lands that spinning wheel kick of his, which a lot of people see coming now because he's gotten finishes with it in the past. Next, Jailton Almeida versus Alexander Romanov. I'm not going to waste any time on this fight. This is a toss-up fight for Jailton Almeida to get back in the win column. It's for his bounce-back win. The Blades fight showed a lot in terms of like where he stands and where his style stands with the rest of the heavyweights. And I do think this is a favorable matchup for him. I'd be shocked if Romanov pulled off the upset, but this is a win that'll get Almeida right back into like the top 5 discussion and title contention and all that. So Jailton Almeida will probably get a first or second round finish. Kevin Holland versus Michal Oleksiejczuk. It's an odd matchup because Holland struggled against MVP. One, that was at 170. Two, that's a completely different style and size that he's in there against. And Oleksiejczuk is like the complete opposite of that. He's like a bulldozer. He's a wrecking ball. He comes forward with almost reckless abandonment, trying to get you out of there, trying to knock you out. And since Holland is not going to be cutting to 170 for this fight, I think it's going to favor him. I think it's going to enable him to engage in a fight a little bit more, make it a little bit more dirty, the way we usually see Holland fight. Like if you go back and watch his Joaquin Buckley fight, that's another guy that's a little bit shorter than him. He was constantly winging elbows in the pocket and throwing shots in the pocket, and that was, I guess, his way of retaking control of the distance. But Oleksiejczuk is a savage. I think this is going to be an intriguing matchup, but I honestly see Kevin Holland finding a submission in this fight. It's either going to be a Kevin Holland submission or an Oleksiejczuk comeback from hell. But unless Oleksiejczuk bulldozes his way through that reach disadvantage, I don't see a path to victory for him. He's shown to do it in the past, though. Chidi and Joe Kwani is a great example. I'm not too sure. I think Kevin Holland could find a submission, like I said. This is a very intriguing matchup. Now we're on to the co-main event. Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. 5-round fight. So I was looking at the metrics for both guys. Strickland has a 4-inch reach advantage, and as we all know, he's got a very good jab, a very efficient jab. And Costa is no stranger to jabs either. Like, he's got a good jab also. He's just got a very short reach for 185 pounds. So I think we could be in store for a jab off. It depends on Costa's willingness to, like, crash in and smother that distance that is going to have Sean's jab be, like, an issue to Costa. And if Costa has that willingness to kind of smother that distance, trade in the pocket and exchange in the pocket, that could much more favor him getting the win over Strickland. I think this is going to be a fight where both guys are constantly trying to make adjustments on each other to find an opening. And I do feel like Sean Strickland is better at staying safe than Paulo Costa. So I think Sean Strickland's going to win by decision. And now we're on to the main event. Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier for the UFC lightweight title. I have nothing written on my note sheet for this fight. And the reason being is because, obviously, I'm rooting for Dustin. Came up short against Khabib after a great interim title fight against Max Holloway. Came up short against Charles after a really impressive winning streak that warranted that second opportunity. And this isn't similar, in my opinion. He went in there against Benoit Saint Denis, and if you go back and watch that fight, there were spots and positions where Dustin did not have the advantage, but I don't think for a second that Dustin was in trouble, and I think he knew that. I think he felt that in the fight. And you see him get more comfortable with the pace of the fight as that second round begins and progresses. The problem I have with that Benoit Saint Denis fight is the guillotines. And everybody's online, saying, don't be silly, shoot the gilly. And Dustin, is like, I'm never going to stop shooting it. Never going to stop pulling for it. And that's fair, but the thing is, we've seen Islam Makhachev get a submission with the exact counter to a guillotine choke, which is the Von Flue choke. We saw it against Drew Dober, and Drew Dober wasn't even going for a freaking guillotine, man. So there's a lot of factors that are against Poirier. He's also had a hip replacement, and I'm curious to see how much grappling he's truly done, because Islam is comfortable anywhere the fight goes on the ground. It does not matter. It's going to be on Dustin. Keep Islam on his toes, similar to how Sarukian did when he fought Islam, and then be able to capitalize when the fight is still on the feet. Way easier said than done, for one thing, and that's the clearest path to victory for Dustin. Islam is a wrecking ball, but my head says Islam Makhachev, and my heart says Dustin Poirier. Take with that what you will. This is going to be a nail-biter of a main event. I can already feel it. But let me know what you guys think about my picks. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, give me a sub. Greatly appreciate it. Appreciate y'all watching. See you in the next one.